Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a LEED Fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Here's a preview of what you're about to hear on this week's Green Building Matters podcast. On May 5th, 2022, I was in Munich, Germany, participating in GBCI Europe's Circle event, which is essentially their rebranded Green Build Europe. It's a fantastic event. 125 green building professionals from all over Europe and a handful from the US came together to reconvene as a LEED-focused community. I had the honor of interviewing Peter Templeton, the president and CEO of the USGBC and GBCI. We had a wonderful conversation on stage in front of a live audience, and that's what you're going to hear on this week's Green Building Matters podcast. After the main podcast ends, if you want, keep listening because we have spliced in the live audience Q&A, which had some really great questions from the audience that Peter was able to address. Enjoy. Peter, thanks for coming on the podcast today. I know you've got a long history in green buildings and LEED. And with all of my podcast guests, I like to have us go back. So where'd you grow up and go to school?
Great. First, thanks for having me on the podcast. Excited to be here and certainly to have an audience in front of us today as well. I grew up in Chicago, in the Midwest of the U.S., and many of you probably know that Chicago is a city that's known for some really inspiring architecture and beautiful spaces, but it has a history of not being so great to its environment or its community. And so it's definitely has shaped me a bit in the work that I do. But I left Chicago to went to school. I studied environmental science in undergraduate, and then after a few years, I went back for a graduate degree in design, environmental design and planning, University of Virginia under William McDonough, which is really where I started to learn about environmental design.
What a great early mentor. So how did you know when you really wanted to make a career out of green buildings? Was there an aha moment? Did William McDonough say, okay, Peter, this is your path? Like, how did that go?
It actually started a little before that. My early professional career was in international development work. I worked in communities around the globe trying to address environmental challenges, acute environmental challenges that they were facing. And it was a struggle to really find out what was best practice to be applying in very different contexts and everything in dealing with water crises to land use crises to resource crises, emissions-related work back in the 90s, where we certainly didn't have this level of expertise around those issues. And that really drove me to search the globe for best practices. And that's how I came across the work that USGBC was just starting at that point in time. That's how I learned about the work that Bill McDonough was doing and his work with Michael Bromgart, and got me into this field.
That's fantastic. All right, so we're still going to look back. So the first LEED buildings were certified in the year 2000. We've got over 20 years of LEED certified projects. I believe you joined the U.S. Green Building Council in the year 2000. So tell us what it was like to be an early team member there with that grassroots movement.
Taking me back. So it isn't that long ago. We're talking about just 2 decades ago, but it seems like eons because so much of this didn't exist. We didn't have huge audiences coming and trying to learn more and carry things forward. It was really us trying to get people to understand why this was important and what it was that we were trying to achieve through that work. I was very fortunate to work with some very smart, committed individuals, many volunteers, community members like yourself that just felt passionately. They knew that green building was the answer to so many of the issues that they were facing in their work. And it's just that sort of contagious enthusiasm that's kept me going for the past 2 decades.
It's fantastic. You've had several roles at the U.S. Green Building Council and, early program manager of LEED and then kind of director of LEED and then the international side in the early 2000s. So can you tell us just what that was like? What was needed early when there probably weren't as much on staff and just, again, those kind of 2000s, if you will?
Yeah. So all hands on deck. It was just, there was more to do than we had capacity for and more to learn than we had time for. So we had to pull in people from everywhere to support us. a really great time. It's where I think the sort of foundations of this community were built globally from the outset. So while, yes, there was a US moniker on the work that we were doing, when we started with the initial set of pilot projects, we had projects in Sri Lanka and other parts of the world. So we really came into this knowing that this was going to have to be a global dialogue. We were going to have to address global issues as part of the work. But in that, it was really tapping expertise wherever we could find it, tapping the energy, the excitement, the enthusiasm, certainly the resources to support that work wherever we could. And we were very fortunate that as soon as we started asking questions and inviting people to come in and talk about these topics, so many practitioners and folks like yourselves here in the room today who had faced some of the same challenges, had asked some of the same questions, or had solved some of those same problems, came forward and contributed your time and expertise. And that's really the success we built off of.
I'm hearing it's a global movement of people. Chris Pike said that in the earlier session. And just look at this live audience for our podcast today as we're in Munich, Germany, May 5th, 2022. Let's look back. One more question. What are some of your proudest achievements?
I mean, there are a lot. And I think all of us, as I said earlier today, have a lot to be proud of. What we're seeing today in terms of accomplishments are things that are worth celebrating. I'll say personally, it really comes from this community. The fact that we have really mobilized an army for change and equipped people. And that's not me personally, it's us collectively, have really built something here. And so, yes, I'm very proud of what we've created with LEAD and the introduction of the LEAD credentials and programs that I think have helped facilitate that work. But every moment of mine that I have, when I say like sort of my top career successes or things that inspire me the most, have been about people. It is so exciting to see that so many people have come with this energy and excitement and talent that they have contributed towards that cause, and they found their calling within this green building movement. And to see so many of them take the leadership role within their organizations, create their own organizations, and do amazing things, that just gets me a little choked up.
Love it. All right, let's go to present day. So what's keeping you busy today? Earlier we were talking, you're traveling a bit, getting back out there, but what's keeping you busy today?
So I will say focusing on the future, and specifically the future of LEAD. Talked about that a bit today already, and that we recognize that we are in an inflection point, and there is work for us to be doing. But when we're hearing from speakers, as we have over the course of today, about the successes that they're achieving and what's driving the work that they're doing or their clients are looking for, we need to make sure that we're not only keeping pace, that we're setting the pace for that work moving forward. And so since I stepped into this role 6 months ago, that has been my immediate focus, is defining what does green building leadership look like in 2022 and 2025 and 2030, and really mapping that out.
And you're gathering a lot of feedback. You've mentioned from the LEAD Fellow Group, from power users here, from large roundtables, firms, small users, large users. So you're gathering a lot of information right now. And, hopefully, and human nature, unfortunately, is more, we go quickly to the negative. Here's what's broken, right? But we also need to remind ourselves of here's what works really well. So are you able to kind of get both the positives and the negatives as you're gathering this feedback? Can you give us a glimpse of that?
Sure. And we need both. So I think it's equally important we understand that there are a lot of challenges in the system that we have created and that we need to make sure that we're addressing those. At the same time, we're looking at evolving the system overall. So I expect you'll probably ask me about some of the areas that have been challenging. We certainly know there's room for improvement with LEAD Online. We know there's room for improvement in some of the information education resources that are out there that answer questions proactively as opposed to reactively as folks hit challenges. So we definitely have work to do on that front. And on the positives, there are conversations, again, referring back to what we've heard today, that this is still a framework that allows folks to communicate about what matters to them, matters to their clients in ways that helps them track progress and demonstrate achievement and be recognized for those achievements. And that is still very powerful. We just want to make sure that we're focused on the right achievements, the right progress, over the right timeline.
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about the technology, LEAD Online, for a minute. Again, it's a group here that uses LEAD Online quite a bit as one of the tools, the rating systems. And, as I understand it, you're definitely trying to listen to that feedback, deploy some updates there. Yeah, can you just keep building on that?
Sure. And if I could take one step back and just say, this is the perfect time for this feedback. So I want to put a call out there to all of the listeners, everyone here today, to be providing feedback on what the experiences are that you've had, We have done a number of surveys and things. We just did a customer experience survey and got over 1,500 responses on that. People feel passionately about the need for us to simplify and address some specific changes. We have already done some things within the Lead Online platform. We'll be rolling out in the next few days the Lead Online web-based forms for all version 4, 4.0 and 4.1, which hopefully will take care of some functionality and performance issues, compatibility issues that folks have had on that front. But we're also looking at what that means for existing users, those that have data in the system, how it is that we improve their experience. When you've got tens of thousands of users in a system, it's hard to change that platform overnight. We want to make sure that your data is safe and that we're carrying that forward. So that will be longer term plans that we'll be sharing with folks. And then it's based on these conversations of where we're going. How do we evolve those platforms overall to make sure that they're actually measuring and reporting the information that's going to be most usable and useful for you, for your clients? How is it tying into some of these other drivers across the industry to make sure that we're providing value as a result of the effort that you're putting into tracking performance of your projects?
I'm hearing user experience, and a lot of us are users there, and that's what we want to hear. So keep the feedback coming. So let's talk about Europe. How do you see the European green and healthy building landscape? And maybe how have you seen it change over the last 10 years?
Sure. So I expect most people in this room can answer this question better than I can, but I have certainly seen Europe coming into its leadership role. When I started this work 3 decades ago, there was sort of a default that, hey, Europe is ahead on this. They think about these things. They understand these things. And there's been back and forth, I think, where different markets have taken lead in terms of where there's been growth and which types of activity, where there's been leadership. Right now, of course, with the introduction of the EU Green Deal and the European taxonomy, there is a clear sense that Europe as a whole is focused on these issues that matter. They're going to track them. They're going to take them seriously. Conversations, again, that we've heard today, make sure that there's accountability behind that work are incredibly important. And that's sending a signal to the entire globe. That's the type of leadership that we need to embrace as an industry. We want to make sure that we carry that forward and show how it can be done in every corner of the globe, whether or not you have the same regulatory framework or supportive access to resources or regulatory leadership.
Thank you. All right, so that was present. So a couple questions about the future. In its history, the U.S. Green Building Council, who now has become this leader with this program LEED, it's such a global brand. I believe you're the 3rd CEO. So Rick Fredrizzi, 4th. Okay, way back, 93. I might count the 90s. Thank you for that correction. So let's say the 4th CEO of the USGBC. But Rick Fredrizzi maybe was known for grassroots efforts. Obviously, he was there when you joined and just really helping grow just this movement. Mahesh Ramanujan may be known for growing LEED internationally and also more performance, the technical side. Maybe that's something that was a big push for Mahesh. And I believe Mahesh helped Kai and Nicole in this GBCI Europe office and then GBCI India. And just, again, that global growth maybe was accelerated. So maybe Rick, grassroots, Mahesh, technical, and some global growth. Peter, in this role, what do you want to be known for?
So I am going to go to history because I think it's important with Christine Irvin and gender equity being an important part of our conversation. She was the first CEO of USGBC back in the late 90s and really laid the foundation for work that we have done around creating this community and LEED. And I have been fortunate to learn from her, from Rick and Mahesh over the course of my career. So there is so much that the 3 of them have helped create in terms of the foundation and the framework for the work that we do, and definitely bring those learnings into this role at this point. But I think we're at a different place. We have opportunities to align the tools that we've created to deploy them at scale. And so in this point, I think it is important that we step back and say that this doesn't have to be just our sandbox. It's not all defined in our universe. So while we've created a vernacular around LEED that we use to communicate around that, that's being challenged by how does that relate to the outcomes that need to be presented with the EU taxonomy and ESG requirements and others. So I really think this is the opportunity to leverage the full potential of the tools that we have by aligning them, working in closer partnership, making sure that they're delivering on the outcomes that are going to be most meaningful to our immediate audience, our immediate community, and also the larger clients that you serve. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we are able to translate all of the work that we're doing and its value into real outcomes. And we can do that by working with these others who are paying attention now to what are the achievements that we can deliver through the built environment.
Thank you for that correction. It sounds like you've been able to work with all of your predecessors and pick the greatest hits from each one. So that's amazing. You're in a really unique position here. That's fantastic. All right, so a lot of buzzwords, but they're more than buzzwords. They're important. We've been talking about it all day here at this conference. ESG, electrification, embodied carbon, digital twins, Internet of Things. What are you most excited about? What's next?
All of the above. And I will say that it is putting them into the right context. So as we take on these future lead conversations, we recognize that the entire landscape has evolved with us and around us, and in large part because of us, again, because of our community and the work that we've done. And so it's looking how it is that we can take the work that we have done, what we have learned, what we have achieved over the past 3 decades, or longer, frankly, to those that were earlier to this conversation, to help advance true decarbonization. The conversations earlier around decarbonization strategies and pathways are possible because we have built frameworks that help us show and measure progress. Along those lines, we need to make sure that we have the opportunity at this point to embed our work more closely there. Electrification, moving away from combustion, all of these are important topics that need to be central. But we have to understand that navigating the ecosystem that we find ourselves in is still going to require every bit of determination that we all bring to this conversation here in the room today and beyond, because we do, we're obviously in the US dealing with just as many gas bans as we're dealing with, environments that are supporting moves away from fossil fuels. So we've got to make sure that we're positioned to have voluntary leadership that is also driving things forward. We can't just rely on regulatory frameworks. So we're fortunate right now that there are drivers through the ESG conversation. There are drivers through the regulatory conversations that I think on both ends of the spectrum are driving us forward. Let's take advantage of this moment in time where we can leverage our theory of change around leadership and accountability and demonstrate the fact that there is real progress being made through the work that we're doing on green buildings here today.
What do you see as the lead's role globally?
I will pick up on that last theme. Again, we have a responsibility. I think we've taken on accountability for us actually defining leadership in this space and continuing to drive markets forward and providing a framework. Again, our goal is not to just, throw out a challenge and hope everyone meets it, that they can clear the bar at the end of the day. We want every project to succeed. We want every project on these graphs and charts that we've been seeing today to be successful, to be, carbon neutral or positive, so that we're able to really realize the full potential of our work. And so it's creating that supporting framework that's going to be, again, tied in with many of these other drivers that are going to help us achieve these really critical goals for us moving forward.
You get to see a lot of technologies, you get to see a lot of buildings. Can you just, give us, I know sometimes you have to be a generalist, but is there a technology or two you've seen maybe in another country that's trending that you just think is going to help the green building movement, whether or not maybe it gets you a lead point or something like that?
So I'm not always going to fall back to the newest thing. I'm love that we're talking about heat pumps. It's pretty exciting. There are things that we need to be embracing more holistically across our entire industry. And so I guess I'm absolutely excited about progress that's being made. I've just come from 3 years working with Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, and just in the whole theme of circularity, there's just amazing technologies that are coming into place that are going to help us make sure that products and materials are staying in productive use. And so I'm thrilled that those technologies are cutting across sectors. It's not just our industry, it's textile and apparel, it's household goods, it's other products. We're all trying to solve some of the same issues. We're all trying to work across supply chain challenges. And so when we look at what the opportunities are, they are around blockchain and other approaches that we can take moving forward for us to have certainty around decisions that we're making in the process of designing and operating our buildings over time.
In Cradle to Cradle and the materials, circularity, we saw LCAs earlier. Let's just talk about materials for a minute, and then we'll get to know you even more. What are the biggest roadblocks there still, do you think, to get to circularity?
On circularity, it's huge. Back to graduate school with Bill McDonough and learning the outset of that work is really knowing that every material is a resource for for something else. It's knowing that clean energy and renewable energy can be used, and that we should be celebrating diversity are the three principles that really lead the cradle to cradle. We have to be taking that thinking to everything that we're doing. And it's not just about those that are involved with, designing and manufacturing products or buildings as a accumulation of products. It's those that are making purchasing decisions have to be very clear about what matters to all of us. And so circularity is going to be a huge challenge for us, but it's going to be a reflection of our values as a society. And that's where I think we have huge opportunities, no matter where we sit in this community, to really influence in that direction.
And even purchasing power of consumers too will come into that conversation. All right, so with all my podcast guests, I like to do some rapid fire, get to know you questions. So, what's your specialty or gift? It's a humbling question.
It is. And sorry, having listened to your podcast, I should have been prepared for this one. I think I'm easily excited in a good way, in that everything that we're talking about in this work just makes me re-energized. I draw my energy from the fact that people are doing good work and excited about what they are doing, and I find it contagious, and that's what motivates me to do more and tell more people about, all these great things that are happening around the world. And so I think that's a gift and a blessing in many ways, because it certainly keeps me motivated, and I think it's helped motivate a few other people along the way.
No, I sense your great optimism. It's so important. And I think we just all need more encouragement. Yeah, it's very important. Do you have any good habits, routines, or rituals that help you stay on point?
I will say, I wish I could say I'm perfectly centered and I go through a ritual every day that does. But no, I think what's actually been most helpful, certainly since stepping into this role, that I sort of take on as a ritual, is just asking the question of who else needs to be in the room, who else needs to be supporting this work, who else needs to be, helping us get there. Because I do think that we're at a time right now, and it's challenging, of course, because people are being pulled in a lot of directions and talent is hard to come by. But this work is really the result of the right people making the right decisions at the right point in time. And so I am super excited, again, by the fact that we've spent decades now equipping people with the skills and capability to make the right decisions and to do the right thing. But we need more of you. And we need to make sure that we're connecting with others who share the passion, share the expertise that we need at this point. So I will say, and ask all of you, who else needs to be in the room? Who else needs to be brought to the table for us to get this right?
And with all my podcast guests, sometimes I ask follow-up questions. So do you prioritize sleep, exercise, healthy eating? Do you like to cook? Because, you're a high performer, a CEO of a large organization. What are a couple of things there? Can you give us a peek in?
So I have been talking to a number of my peers who are also CEOs of organizations that I know a lot of you intersect with, who have been giving me a lot of guidance stepping into this role. And a lot of them are telling me how important it is that I get 8 hours of sleep and how important it is that I exercise regularly and have good regimens. I think I've let all of them down so far, but it's something to work on.
And we have a little time, so I'm going to throw in a bonus question. Bucket list. I'm a fan of the bucket list. Mm-hmm. What are one or two things maybe on your bucket list? Any adventure, travel? Do you want to write a book?
Yeah, I don't think I have a book in me just yet. What I would like to see are, a lot of the stories, again, like those we've heard today, being able to package those and get them out there. So I will come hunt a few of you down over the years and say, hey, is there a way that we can get these stories in front of more people moving forward? For me, it has always been my focus in stepping into this work decades ago to really feel like we're hitting the mainstream. I think that moment's upon us. We are at a place right now where organizations, private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector, around the globe are voicing their commitments to the same things that we care about. This is not where we were a decade ago. This is not where we were 2 decades ago. We have organizations trying to outdo one another in terms of their commitments to climate action and to addressing health and social inequities and issues that matter to us as a community. So I am thrilled. We have to continue to push them to do more and hold them accountable for fulfilling those pledges and commitments. And that's going to get us over the edge and really make this, move us from sustainable practice to conventional practice and this being mainstream.
That's amazing. I see that too. When I had Mahesh on, he said he wanted to meditate in a cave in Tibet. So what's one destination you want to travel to when it's easier to get to?
Oh, great question. Mahesh was always more grounded and centered and probably had that response at the ready.
Fun.
Or go back to, there's plenty of places. Right now, to be honest, I actually need to go to Chicago. Need to get back home. So that is the one place I really need to be right now.
I'll take it. I love it. Just a couple more questions. To the young professionals listening to our podcast, getting inspired, hearing your career, your green building journey, and maybe some of the audience, if they're just now jumping into this green building movement, it's been good to you, it's been good to me. And what words of encouragement do you have for someone that's just now getting started in green buildings?
Well, one, just do it. I've talked to a lot of folks who are looking at, career opportunities. And right now, I believe around the world is a great time to be looking for a job. So folks have choices of what they get to do. And I think it is really important that folks are looking to have an impact. That becomes a much bigger factor in looking for how people dedicate their time and their careers moving forward. And I think we can offer that in spades, the ability to truly have an impact, to define, help shape this whole industry and the future of the work that we're going to be doing in the future of our built environment. So one, I want people to really understand what a career in green building offers to them. And two, I always encourage them because to a person, I feel that this is a personal passion of all of ours, and I want them to talk to as many people as possible. I draw energy from that when people ask me to talk about what that would be. I've know how many stories all of you here have to share about your journey, your successes, and I really encourage them to take those opportunities to learn and share, because it's been so good to me from the opportunities to connect in with people, understand how they have succeeded in the work that they've done. And I think that that's the best path forward.
Let's go for it. Last question. To this audience, this group of European green building enthusiasts, how can they help you in what you're trying to achieve?
Oh, it's a longer list. But this is, I do want to remind everyone, we feel like, okay, I just said we're coming to a moment when this becomes mainstream. That means our work is just beginning, that we really, really, really need to make sure that every person who is working in this space around the globe, of which we are just a tiny fraction of that community, needs to be equipped with the knowledge and experience that you have. So we need to look at how it is that we scale this most effectively. So obviously, there's the direct asks around, we need your input. This is the time as we focus on the future of LEED and where we need to be setting the bar and how it is that we're trying to focus everyone's attention on the right thing. But in doing that, we want to be thinking about how is it that we bring in these new audiences, help them understand what can be achieved, what's the best way to get there, and how it is that we equip them with the right tools to be successful in doing so. So there is a lot of work, but it's continuing to share your experiences, share your expertise, and ask for more.
Well, Peter, on behalf of this audience, but me personally, I've built more than one company based around LEED. Thank you for dedicating your career to LEED and for being on the Green Building Matters podcast today.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Charlie. Well, I want to extend this podcast and doing the live questions here. Since we have the CEO of the United States Green Building Council here, I think you guys should take advantage of it and ask a couple of questions. So now is the time. First hand coming up.
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you again. I wanted to ask a question about LEED and climate adaptation in buildings. LEED's put a lot of focus in recent years on the carbon question. There's been a lot of talk all day about decarbonization, but not to be a cynical Gen Xer, but the climate's already changed. It's going to change more before we can really start to apply the brakes. And we see national and municipal governments starting to change building codes and implement criteria to address future climate scenarios and what we might expect. What's the kind of philosophy around adapting buildings for future climate scenarios, given that the future climate scenarios are kind of a moving target anyway? Where's LEED going with that?
Yeah, it's a great question and great to see you, Sue, as well. So as Ingemar and others mentioned, we've just started to have these conversations around the future of LEED, and this is one of the categories in the sort of adaptation resilience conversations that is being prioritized. And as I former member of the LEED steering committee, so you know that the committee is focused on this as one of the areas that they're trying to address and set new targets for. We are trying to do this on a very aggressive timeline. It is our goal in June, yes, 1 month from now, to be able to talk about what some of those targets are and then get feedback from everyone and try to move forward with an update to LEED over the course of the next 2 years so that we're able to introduce that in a beta format and certainly have it out formally and balloted by 2025. So trying to move that forward quickly. This is a topic that's at the front and center of that. My most recent conversations on this topic have been, and again, this is not formally blessed or that, but I just want to make sure that every project coming into the LEED pipeline is aware of what the climate risks are that are related to it. And so that we're equipping everyone with that information as they start making decisions. And it's not something that we're saying, oh, we need you to do these assessments. It's like, no, we know where we can find that information. Let's make sure we put that in the hands of every project team so that they're preparing for those risks and taking those into account as they undertake their design efforts, their building efforts moving forward. So I think it's changing the dynamic a little bit about how we've approached that in the past and saying we want everyone to go through the exercise of trying to collect information. Sure, that's going to be necessary, but the information that we can provide to them around climate risks associated with development of any particular parcel in any part of the world or any existing building that's going to continue operations in any part of the world, we should be able to supply them as part of this process moving forward.
Hi, so I'm one of those young professionals that you just talked about. So I took the guts to ask a question. Today we were speaking a lot about ESG, and there were some very nice and witty comments about the social aspect and gender equality and all of that. And I enjoyed that. But in the themes we talked about, there was not so much discussion about the social aspect. And I was wondering, how do we bring that into a sustainable world? And who are we building the buildings for? That we want to encourage and that we want to make the standard?
First, thank you for being here and thank you for asking that question. In our work, and this is one of those topics that we're focused on daily within our organization right now. I would say this goes to the boards of both USGBC and GBCI are very centered on what it is that we're doing to advance the communities that we are working in. Particularly low wealth communities and those that don't have access to a lot of the benefits of green building as it stands today, and that we want to make sure are not left behind in this work. In the conversations we're having around the future of LEED, I think first and foremost, we're coming to the table that we know that addressing climate is going to have an impact on all of those communities and disproportionately on some that will be least prepared for that unless we take action comprehensively on climate. So we want to make sure that our work on decarbonization is prioritized so that we're not having the ability to mitigate those challenges to those communities moving forward. But then we also have to be very intentional. And the work that we're doing around diversity and equity and inclusion means different things in different communities around the world. It's why it's important that we have regional perspectives on that and we understand what it is. If we're talking about making sure that there are access to the benefits of green building in all communities, how is it that we actually achieve that? And what are the barriers or challenges to achieving that we need to be addressing in each region, which is where we turn to many of you to help us understand that more directly. This is a part of a much larger dialogue across the United States and other parts of the world right now that I think are tied into, I think, much delayed and much needed progress on racial equity and other issues that we need to address as a region, as a community. But we want to make sure that we're not overlooking or missing other aspects to that conversation in this work. So I certainly invite feedback and suggestions on how we do that.
One of my favorite LEED categories is actually quality of life and the LEED for Communities program. And I think, so if you haven't looked at that, look at that. I think LEED in its current form, right, Peter, is we design and build buildings that are less impact on the environment. We operate buildings that are less impact on the environment. Over here, we have well and fit well and healthy building standards. But, with all of the investment going to ESG, I think luckily there's a lot more focus on all of it. But many companies are definitely a little behind on S. But I would look at the quality of life category. I just wanted to throw that out there.
One of few of the drivers that are moving the market, it's as we saw today, it's mandatory regulation, pressure from investors, and also reputational risk. Now, I was looking at the country brief about Italy at the moment. So we have more than 350 certification in BDC and less than 70 in LEED O&M. Now, do you think the market would be ready, like, to make a shift and put some pressure on clients and to address the performance gap? Like saying, for example, that your LEED new construction or commercial interior certification will expire within certain amount of time if you're not moving to LEED O&M for real, providing real data.
So, and I want to make sure everyone heard the question. It's just in terms of, are we ready to put more pressure on buildings actually delivering performance as an outcome? First and foremost, I want to say that there is a clear recognition that while we have done a lot on the new construction side with building design and construction, we have a tremendous amount of work to do on existing buildings as a whole. So the work that we're doing when we talk about scale is really going to be looking at what can we do to help address the existing buildings on their path towards decarbonization, on the efforts that they need to take, and how can we do that with entire portfolios, how can we do that at scale as a whole. So just want to mention that. There is a lot of conversation right now about how it is, what drivers we can add to the mix that are going to help projects that we're supporting during the design and construction phase ensure that they're delivering on those outcomes. Whether that actually relates to certifications expiring or there being some automatic transition, we're already requiring performance data and asking things within the system. It's how it is that we put the right drivers in place. That's an open conversation right now. We'd love to hear from all of you about your perspectives on whether the market is ready to be required to doing that. Because of some of the challenges of ownership and things, it's a little bit hard for us to say a project that's designed and delivered by one company is then required to certify by another company that may not have been part of that initial process. How is it that we get them? What are the drivers that we can put in place to make sure that's going to happen?
Other questions?
Charlotte here. I just have one question on the relation between LEED certification and data collection that we talked about earlier, and how the scheme can help actually do this data collection and transparency that we require, especially on the European market.
So I think some of the points that Chris made earlier are really important for us. So we need to be looking at how it is that we're getting the right data and that we're leveraging that data for all of its potential purposes. We want to make sure that we are able to get the greatest value out of that data as a whole. So this is a conversation now as we're looking at what are those metrics that matter to us. And I think I may have mentioned earlier, but I will now again, just saying we want to make sure that we're able to talk about things in more universal terms than just credits or points. So the outcomes of what we're talking about from LEED can be related directly to what's being asked for from, again, ESG goals and requirements, from regulatory requirements. And that's an area that's going to require input from the market to make sure that we get those data points right. But there's no question that we need to make sure that performance, going to the earlier point, is really what we care about at the end of the day. We want to be able to talk about that at every individual asset and across portfolios and across communities. And so in order to roll that data up, we need to be revisiting what it is that we're actually collecting and how that information can be carried across to different users for different purposes.
It's here. Question? Yeah.
So is introducing third-party verification by an independent third party, be the GBCI or partners, to be the ANSI certification on the table as a way of simplifying the LEED process, sure, and also kind of add credibility to the system? Mm-hmm. Something similar to the well rating system, how sure it works at the moment?
Yes, there is. One, it comes down in terms of the future of LEED conversation. It really comes down to what it is that we're measuring and then determining how best that is actually collected and verified in that process. So in the well certification, of course, there are aspects of that are best done through testing that's managed on site. We will, of course, look at all of those opportunities within LEED. And in terms of the LEED certification model, we're also looking at ways to streamline and to scale. Because if we get our wish, we do have to look at different ways that we're able to deliver this to be able to support it across the market. So open to all suggestions on how we do that most effectively. I will also say that I expect that some factor of the work that we do moving forward is going to be verified through AI or other ways if we're working from a true data model, so that it won't all just come down to individuals having to go through checklists and reams of documentation. If we're looking at performance, there certainly are ways in 2022 to do that differently than when we started.
Peter, I keep threatening the market that in Europe I'm the LEED police, so keep an eye on the non-smoking stickers.
We'll send Kai to any of your projects.
So any other questions here?
Hi, I'm Patricia from Spain. I have a question about energy. Following up what Chris Pike said, it really impacted me when he said not all energy is created equal, and talked about the risk about gas term, and then the greener the kilowatt per hour gets. And I was wondering if in the lead, energy modeling, are you going to implement some other KPI to measure energy efficiency? I know we're doing it by cost, and is cost a way to make the ratio between gas energy and electricity energy get equal, since they're not developing in an equal manner, basically. So are there going to be any changes in the future, or is the cost the most appropriate KPI to measure energy at the moment? Because we don't get into other discussions.
So I can get myself into a lot of trouble here by saying things that may not, apply. And I'm certainly not a member of the lead steering committee that will make these decisions. They're definitely looking at whether cost is the most appropriate metric moving forward, simply because it's been used as a proxy for other things since it was adopted. And it's, of course, tied to ASHRAE and to other, standards that we rely on. Are there better ways for us to measure it in a world where we understand that there is much more complex perspective on the energy scenario from the grid to the project? So it's definitely under consideration in terms of what it is, what matters, how it is that we best measure that moving forward. But I can't give you a clear indication of what direction that will come out. It may be that there are alternatives. There likely will be testing of different approaches that get considered as this evolves moving forward. What I do expect is that we will try to make a much more direct tie between carbon or GHG emissions and energy, and not relate on that entirely as energy or cost as a proxy for GHG emissions.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up. Are you going to roll out a more stringent version of ASHRAE? We've seen that most of the companies that are doing ESG reporting are setting a different standard because we're not stringent enough.
Yes. It is duly noted. And again, it's been part of my priority coming into this role, is making sure that we're looking at where we need to be going forward. Obviously, we've made adjustments between 4.0 and 4.1. We certainly hope every project is going as far as they can. And by no means do we see, LEED as being, the farthest that anyone should reach. If projects can do something more aggressive, we encourage them to do so. But coming into this, that's part of why, we want to have this larger conversation. Is this the right approach for us to be taking in 2022? So that is definitely part of where we're at right now, about how it is that we continue to raise the bar and push the entire market where it needs to go. Certainly around the globe, there is code and regulation that has actually surpassed some of the minimum requirements within LEED, and we want to make sure that we address that as well.
If I may add to the greenhouse gas, there is an option, I believe, that you can go at the greenhouse gas emission under the LEED scheme. Somewhere hidden, it's a pilot. Ask Michelle from our team. So that's one. Then I will ask a last question, and this is basically my role of work in the European market that I've been asked from many consultants, but also national councils. A couple of years back, there was in the US, Greenbuild US, you had, I believe, the CEO of BREEAM on stage. So that was well received here in Europe, and everybody seemed to get excited, but I couldn't share more information. So now Chris Pike presented ARC and Open Tool. We had all this exit modules, I call them, add-ons, CREM, whatever. And these are things that serve the European market, a very diverse market. So I believe actually with the most diverse market as far as benchmarks, rating system, and probably every consultant here is using at least 2 different systems when they set the proposal. Can you elaborate a little bit on this one? Is there other discussion going on? What's the future? Is ARC being something that can address this diversity? These are thoughts that I've been asked basically on a permanent basis.
And I will say to the point that, or the question that Charlie asked me earlier about things I want to be known for, it's how it is that we best leverage, and align with other tools and organizations and partners that are driving in the same direction. So I am less, I think, territorial. I'll say I'm just as competitive, but less territorial in terms of how it is that we relate to other programs and partners and organizations. I want to make sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity that we have to demonstrate progress moving in this direction. So already within ARC, you have the opportunity to do that and to support progress and tie that into achievement and recognition with multiple systems. We will certainly, within our own offerings at GBCI, we have multiple tools that we support, and we obviously provide services to WELL and others that we want to make sure are continue to be considered here. So I absolutely expect that in the future, we will find ways that we can work with other organizations, support their efforts, align with their efforts, contribute to their efforts in other ways. And hopefully it's my expectation that we'll benefit from their efforts as well.
Thank you very much, Peter, as well. Charlie, then I'd like to close this session of yours because we now going for the final closing keynote. So again, it was a pleasure, and it will be available on GBET's download.
We'll launch the podcast next week, so everybody can take another listen. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks again, man. I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.